this week we'll be sketching some of our general shapes first so that we're not painting over everything so much, especially since our fish are going to be lighter colors, yellows and whites. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to draw the general shapes for our fish. So think about how many you want in your composition. I would probably only do 1 to 3, just because there are a lot of like little details later on that you'll probably want to add, and it'll just take additional time for every other fish you have. So I'll probably do 2 on mine, and you can make them as big or as small in your paper that you want, just knowing that the rest of the area will be filled with the water and lily pads, so you can make that call.
Can we see the one you did before?
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, that's pretty.
And then I was trying out a lot of different techniques on this one, so I didn't post it, but this gives you an idea.
I like that.
It gives you an idea of a couple options. So to draw our fish, we're going to start with a circle. And this is going to be the head of your fish, so make it as large as you want your head to be. That's probably a better size. So once you have the circle you're using for your head, you're going to put a small circle somewhere behind where your head is. So if I put my small circle here, you can start to imagine this line connecting the two. And this line is going to kind of represent the backbone of your fish. So once you have your head and your little circle at the bottom, you can connect those. By connecting the side of the top one and the side of the bottom one. Now this is just the head and the body. It doesn't include the tail or the fins. We'll add those on later, but laying out these general shapes is going to help us out a lot to start out with. And you can make them as straight or curvy as you want. This one ended up a little bit straighter, but depending on how you draw that spine, connecting it can change the curve a lot. So then if I add in another one, I can connect these. And then once you have your bodies sketched out for however many fish you're going to do, we're going to draw some circles surrounding the fish to lay out where our lily pads are going to be. And on my example ones, I did a few clusters, so 2 to 3 per cluster. And the circles tend to slightly overlap. They grow really densely in the same area. So you can add those in. And the scale, you can be pretty playful with the scale on these. When I was looking at images, you know, there's lots of little lily pads, but then there's some that are huge and bigger than the fish themselves. So you can decide what works best with your composition and play around with that, or you have a variety of sizes. but we'll use these to fill in some of the areas that are a little more bare. So that is what I'm laying out for my composition. So I have my two fish in the center. They'll be the highlight. And then just along the edges, I've added some lily pads and little clusters. So I'll give everyone a couple more minutes to make sure that they get theirs the way they want. Because the hope is on this one that we're not going to have to paint over too many sections. And while we're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and prep my blue and green, get those ready, as well as some white. We'll be painting the water first. So whenever you get done, you can go ahead and pour out those three colors: blue, white, and green. And if you are getting your paints ready around this time too, you can look at your brushes. I would recommend a medium-sized flat brush for the background, so it can cover, more space more efficiently. But make sure it's one that's, not too frayed, so we can get some crisper lines as we'll be working around the shapes that we've defined. So for everyone who's ready to move on, for the background, we'll be applying the blue, white, and green kind of consecutively to get kind of a multicolored effect. So you can move from blue in one section and then transition it into greens. You can lighten it up in areas with white, and the white will also help to blend. To do this, I would recommend starting in like a corner and working your way across. That way the paint's going to stay wet where you're working, and then it'll allow it to dry as we move on. So I'll get started and kind of show you what I'm talking about. And this can be really loose. Just have fun with it. So I put down some blue. I'm lightening it up with the white. And I'm just going to work that around. And then when you feel like you want to, you can transition and work some green in there. And it's up to you how much green you want to add. A lot of koi ponds are really shallow. You can see all the plant life along the bottom, so you get that green effect a lot. But if you want it to be more blue, that is up to you. You could do multiple shades of blue. And it'll just depend on your paint and paper, how quickly you have to work with this. I found that in several of my practices, the paint dried very quickly, so that's why I recommend starting in a section, getting it the way you like, and then kind of working from there across the page. And as you go, just outline around your shapes that we've defined. It doesn't have to be perfect, but as long as you just leave them generally the same shape, that'll help us out a lot later. anyone who's getting close to moving on, you'll want to get yourself a dark green and a light green. We'll be moving on to the lily pads. So for the lily pads, we'll be taking the dark green, and where we have left those areas, I'm just going to cover that whole area in the dark green. And while you're painting your lily pads, I would recommend over painting, so painting over into the water a little bit rather than under painting, because you don't want to leave any white spots if possible. So I would just make them a little bit bigger. That way they fill up all those gaps. Once you have your dark green down on your lily pads, we'll add some accents in the light green. So all I'll be doing with the light green is choose an edge that you want your highlight to be. So I've used this example before, but choose a corner of your paper and imagine that there's a light source coming from one corner, and anywhere that light hits on your objects is where you're going to highlight. So if I have my light down here in the bottom right corner, it's going to hit this edge on these lily pads. And you'll just do that all the way around on all your lily pads, determining where your highlight is going to be. And it can be slightly exaggerated depending on what style you're going for, but that's a good little like trick of the mind to get your highlights in the correct places. And this will also be the opportunity where you can really define which lily pads overlap the others. So I have these two butted up against each other. So I'll just pull out this corner and connect it. And you can tell that that one sits on top now because I've extended the bottom of it overlapping. Once you have your highlights in place, you can take a medium green. I just mixed the two that I had made, my light green and my dark green. And I'm just going to add some texture on top of these. It's going to look like little starburst. Just so that they're not so flat. I'm just going to add that element onto each of them. The little slits on the lily pads. I think they're cute without them. But if you want them, you can go back and add them, just painting over with your background color. So when you start to get to a good place with your background and your lily pads, you can start thinking about what colors you want your koi to be. They come in tons of different colors. You can Google it and pull up some real life photos if you're curious. But, you know, the common variants are gold, like all over gold, gold with spots, red spots. There's some that are just black and grays. So there's a lot of different variations on it. So I would recommend, if you are curious, Googling it, seeing which ones you kind of like, and then you can imitate their patterning and colors. I'll be replicating the two that I did on this one, so a gold one and a red, gray, and black variant. So I'm going to go ahead and prep my golden orange color and make sure I have enough white to lay down the base of my second koi. And once you have your colors decided, I'm just going to lay down a base coat of each of the colors. I'm going to do one base gold and one base white, just in this space that we have defined here. And then we'll add on the fins and the tail once everyone gets to this spot. And like on the lily pads, I recommend over painting your lines a little bit rather than painting on the inside, paint on the outside. That way you don't have any white space showing between the fish and the background.
Oh, cute.
So as we move into the tails and fins, I just made a little cheat sheet of some of the shapes that you could use for those. And you can mix and match them if you have multiple fish, or make them the same if you think that they're kind of the same breed. So if you're getting close to moving on, you'll want to decide what color you want your fins and tails to be. It might be the same color as your body, but it might be something different. Say that you have a mostly white fish, but it has a black fin, you know, it gives it some character. Or on my gold one that I did here, I did some lighter yellow fins.
That's good. Oh,
So you can kind of think about what that's going to be, if it's going to match your body or be different. If you're going to do spotted fins, I would do the base color first, and then you can add the spots on when we do the spots on the body. So decide what base colors you want to use for your fins and your tails. and get those ready if they are colors that you have to prepare. If not, then you're already ahead and you'll be good to go in the next step. So, for drawing out my fins and tail, I'm going to be using a round pointed brush, just so I can get some crisp lines when I'm drawing these out. And once you decide which style, which shape of fins and tail you like, you can start placing those. But I'm just going to draw an outline of what I think the shape's going to be, and then I'll fill it in. And I would start conservatively with your shapes. So start smaller, and you can always make them bigger if you feel like they're not, if they need to be a little bit bigger to be in proportion to your bodies. So once you have your tails and fins in place, if you're doing a spotted fish, you'll need to go ahead and prepare the colors for your spots. In my case, for my whitefish, I'm going to prepare a red and a gray, a medium gray for my spots. And then for my goldfish, I will just be using the light yellow that I used for my fins to accent the body. So I'll already have what I need prepared for that one. So I'll start with my spotted fish first. I'm going to have predominantly red spots, so I'm going to lay those down first. The gray ones will go on top of that. So for the spots, you can just place them organically, or like I said earlier, you could pull up a photo of a koi fish and use that patterning to try and base where you place your shapes. But general rules for it, try different sizes, do some really big, some smaller, a medium, and also try different shapes. They can be kind of rounded, kind of jagged. So don't feel like they have to be too perfect. Just place them, wherever it feels like you need some extra coverage, some extra color, and just go for it, because it's completely random. But I think you just gotta start somewhere and see how it feels. But I like to start kind of in the middle with the body and see how that works, and then I can add more in other places to accent.
So you're going to go down with your primary spot color first. In my case, that is red. In yours, it might be gray, or brown, or gold. And while you're doing your spots on your body, feel free to add spots on your tails or fins as you see fit. They can be, spotless. On this example, I didn't do any on the extremities, but, it works either way. So these had spots on the fins, and I think they're really cute.
And while I wait for those spots to dry on this fish, I can add some accents onto my solid fish. So if you have one that is a singular color, you can add details like these. So on my single color fish, I'm just going to be adding some highlights in a lighter color to several areas on the fish, mostly along the edges. And then depending on the color of your fins and tail, you can do either a lighter color or a darker color to accent those. So since I went with light yellow fins, I'll be putting my darker golden as accents on those. So adding these lines on the fins and the tail, I'm just going with the natural contours of the body. And once your primary spots have dried, if you're doing a secondary color, you can go in and add those spots. So I'm going to add some medium gray spots to my red and white fish. And I want my secondary spots to be smaller, less prominent than my red ones. I think that just gives more hierarchy to the image. So you clearly have white as your first, red as your second, gray as your third. So you can think about that as you place those additional spots. And while you're working on your spotted fish, you can also add contour lines similar to what we did on our solid fish. So I'm going to be using a light gray to add some shadows and contour to my fish. I'm just going to add those accents on the fins, just a little texture there, and on the tail. But they have so many spots already, they don't need a whole lot. And then when you're ready, we'll add a top fin onto our fish. And so I'll start with my solid one because I know he's dry and ready for it. So for the top fin, I am just going to draw a line mimicking where we had that spine early on. It runs about 1.5 to 2 inches down his body. And that's on mine. You'll have to scale it proportionally for yours. But just that middle third of the body is a good length for that, that fin. And you can start with just a straight line, and then you can shape it as you see necessary. So if I have just my single line here to one side to give it a little bit more depth. And you can do the same thing with your spotted fish, but you're likely going to have to add some more additional accents to your spotted one. Say on mine, if I do white, it's gonna cross over onto places that are already white. So I'm just gonna wanna add a little gray accent when I draw that one out. On the solid ones, it's a little bit more straightforward because you aren't having to deal with multiple values. And whenever you're ready, next I'll be adding eyes onto my fish. So just using black and the smallest paintbrush that I own, I'll just get a little bit of paint on the tip there. And I'm just going to add the eyes towards the upper portion of the head, about at the widest spot. And they're just going to be a little dash, so a tiny oval. And I just did a little stroke using my paintbrush. And then the same on the other side, getting them in about the same spot. The next step I'll be doing is I'm going to add some motion lines, some waves around their bodies to give them some more movement in the water. So as you can see on these, I've just added some light, just a light touch with a white line around areas of movement. So around their heads, their fins, the tail. And this is just going to help make them feel more like they're moving and they're more grounded in the space. So I would recommend a very small brush and just loading it up with just enough for one stroke. And then you can refill for the other ones. And just go along the contours of the body. We're going to add these little ripples. And while you're adding those motion lines around your fish, you can add some around your lily pads too. Even though they're not moving, if the water's moving, it's interacting with them. And so there will be ripples around those as well. If anyone has eyes that are dry, the black parts that are dry, we're going to add a white highlight just in the very front of that oval we made. And so I've just put a little bit of white on my tiny brush, and I'm just going to dot it right at the top there. So that he has some highlight. And while we're finishing these little details, I'm also going to add whiskers. And so those are just going to be placed in front of the eyes, moving backwards along the body. And you can make them as short or as long as you would like. An additional optional step would be to do flowers on your lily pads. And the ones I did on this example were fairly simple. They're just kind of triangle petals with a pink center. So if you want to do these lily pad flowers, I just started with like a generic snowflake shape where you just make the crosses in each way. So I did 3 lines, and then I turned those into triangles.